pandemic series for Craft Costume Call that we've been doing. It's been Karen and I together who've been interviewing other writers. But today, Karen has agreed to let me interview her for one very special reason. Her spiritual memoir, The Minister's Wife, published by Tyndale House Publishers, releases officially May the 5th. And so we're going to talk all about that. But first, let me tell you a little bit about my dear friend, Karen. Karen Stiller is an award-winning writer and editor whose work has appeared in publications like The Walrus, Reader's Digest, and Faith Today. She's a senior editor of Faith Today, Canada's Christian magazine, and host of a podcast produced by the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada. She serves as moderator of the Religion and Society debate series at the University of Toronto and has a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Nonfiction. She lives in Ottawa with her husband, Brent, who is an Anglican priest, and together they have 3 young adult children. Her newest book, The Minister's Wife, is beautiful and it's full of truth. It's told in the kind of language that has the power to fill other writers and lovers of words with longing. And readers won't have to be ministers' wives or even people of faith to see themselves in its pages. Karen, congratulations.
Oh, thank you. That was a beautiful introduction. Thank you.
This has been a long time in coming.
Mm-hmm.
How long?
Well, I started to write The Minister's Wife within the structure of that Master of Fine Art in Creative Nonfiction that you mentioned. And I started that in the summer of 2016. And I graduated in the spring of 2018. So yeah, I started it probably in August of 2016.
You went into this program, the MFA program, as a working journalist. With all of the standard, tools that a working journalist has in their kit bag. What convinced you to throw out all of those familiar tools and to write a memoir, to share so intimately about your life and your own experience?
Yeah, you know what? It was, that is a great question. And I think that it was for initially the craft of writing. Like I knew I had this opportunity to grow as a writer and become hopefully a better writer. And so I knew I had that toolkit, maybe half full. I wouldn't say I was like this fantastic journalistic writer, but I knew how to do that. So then within the confines of the program, I had a chance to really write about anything I wanted as long as they approved it and, agreed that it was a good project. And so I pretty quickly thought, this is my opportunity to write what I know, which is often the advice given to writers in all stages of their journey. But I really hadn't done a lot of that, of starting with a blank page. So this was very much blank page writing for me. So I just thought it would be the way that I would grow the most as a writer. And I just wanted to get the most out of the program. So that was my starting place. And then quickly, as I started to write, I realized, I'm actually finding this like hard work, but I'm really enjoying writing about the spiritual life, which for me is deeply embedded in my life as a minister's wife. And so I quickly shifted gears into really enjoying it and also feeling extremely challenged as a writer. So I got to check that off my box.
I like that you use the word shifted gears, because as I was thinking about your memoir, and I just reread it again last night. It's wonderful, actually over the past 2 nights. But what had to shift inside of you, to make that kind of writing possible? Because it's very different, to go from telling other people's stories to reflecting and thinking about your own and making sense of them.
Well, it's interesting. I'm going to answer that in 2 ways. And one is that when I started to write, I was still relying on that toolbox. So I hadn't fully shifted gears yet. If I knew I was going to write about forgiveness, for example, which is one of my chapters, I went and did a bunch of research on forgiveness. And I, made notes, and I might have even had an outline. And then I would start to write, and I was kind of relying on those tools. And then one of my mentors in the program, because you're assigned very experienced writers who act as your faculty mentors, I'll never forget this. He said, blow up your formula. I see what you're doing, opening anecdote, supporting expert insight, unpacking, closing, formulaic ending. And so that really, I felt like he pushed me out onto a writing tightrope. So that has more to do with form. But the decision to be very transparent and vulnerable about things that often clergy and ministers' wives that I know maybe are tempted to not be that vulnerable or transparent, was kind of a decision of the spirit in a way. Like I wanted to share my own experience with God and the church, believing, I think in some ways, that it might help other people, because I've been deeply helped by spiritual writing and by the honesty of other spiritual writers. So I was really coming to believe in memoir in general, but a spiritual memoir in particular, as a really wonderful form of writing that could really help people and impact people. But even at the beginning, I wasn't, actually thinking that clearly about it, because I didn't think I was writing a book that would be published. I was more just thinking, I have an opportunity here to really explore my thinking, my heart, my soul, and my writing. And I'm going to write about my life as a minister's wife. And, I made sure it was okay with Brent, my husband. And we agreed that he wouldn't read it, any of my work, until it was done. And in fact, he didn't until I was about to sign the publishing contract. We really kind of built a wall up, because I think we were both afraid that I would feel less, more hesitant about being transparent, fully transparent, if I felt like he was reading it for, to check or comment or something. So I guess not every couple would do it that way, but that's how we did it.
Wow, amazing, amazing, Karen. What did you learn about the craft of writing in the process of making that shift? What was surprising to you, or?
Gosh, it surprised me how frightening it was. I would feel like I was really out on a tightrope, and I didn't have my usual safety nets around me. So I was surprised at how exhausting it was. I learned how tiring it was. Like if I blocked out a day to write, I might get 3 hours of writing done in that day. And then I was just depleted, or I had to stop because I wasn't sure where I was going next. So I learned about the importance of waiting and, dwelling in a place. One of my other mentors when she would critique my work back to me, she would say, dwell here longer, Karen. So that had more to do with the actual writing, like the beauty of digression in this kind of writing. So I would maybe go down what might feel like a rabbit trail, like we use that language as writers, and then realize, no, I'm discovering something important here, so I'm going to keep exploring that. So I think I learned about the beauty of the unplanned. And, for the first time in my life, I understood as a writer that you could be knocked off balance. Like if there was, say, upset in my home on the morning on which I planned to write, I'd be like, I can't write today now. And I've never been like that as a writer. I've never, I would
muse disappears.
Yes, yeah. And I would almost probably scoff at that before, because I was so, I'm doing my research, I've made my outline, and now I'm going to write this piece and submit it. But this was relying much more on, I guess, the state of my heart. And I'm not used to that. So I learned about that.
Wow. Interesting. I'd like to read a little excerpt from the book that I think really sums up what this book is about, because it's not a book that tells a chronological story. It tells a thematic one. And chapters revolve around topics like prayer and community and forgiveness. In the very first chapter on identity, you write about other people's expectations. And I love these paragraphs, so I'm just going to share them. You write, "Not all expectations are bad. Some save you. For me, one is the expectation that I will be there and belong, that I will show up and be part of this faith and of this church or that church, big or small, east or west, city or country, year after year, hardly missing a beat and rarely a Sunday and never a good rummage sale. Showing up and choosing to belong have been ways that I have loved my husband well and learned to love God better, and certainly the people who bug me. To belong is a discipline that helps me to believe. The conviction I have that I need to appear at church, and probably not every minister's spouse feels this way, has tethered me when I might otherwise have floated away, as the best-hearted people sometimes do. I have seen enough people drift away from their faith to know that holding on to mine is what is best for me. And church, with all of its imperfections, is faith's incubator. Church is faith's hospital and its picnic grounds, its sheltering tree, and also the rich soil from which it grows. Church embraces faith and holds it tenderly with strong arms. It embraces me. And so I love the church, even when it expects more of me than I think it should." I love that, Karen. Thank you for such
Thank you.
beautiful words. And I think the reason I love it is because it feels so true to my own life experience. You know, we know that writing can help us to realize what we really think and feel about things. And you touched on this a couple of minutes ago. I'm wondering, was there anything in the writing of this book that you really understood about your life or about yourself, maybe for the first time?
Oh, that's an excellent question. I should have had you send me the questions. You know, I think maybe it's what you touch on in that paragraph, in that I think I realized how much I love the church, actually, and how necessary it has been for my life and for my spiritual life, for my relationship with God, I and the strength of community, I think, and also how much I do love, you know, the people, like, and I'm one of the people, like how much love there can be in those communities, even when they're tough places. And I'm a minister's wife who does not have horror stories. Like I have met, and you maybe have met, and it seems to be usually the wives, the pastor's wives, who may have really big stories of being hurt by the church. I don't have a single one of those stories. And I'm really, you know, I'm thankful for
Well,
that.
you do have some little ones.
I do.
That you share in the book. And that's fair. It makes for good reading.
Yeah, I do. And you know, I, as a writer, like I have, and a writer of spiritual memoir, it really helped me to think and read about memoir writing, because I think it was Mary Carr in The Art of Memoir. She talks about basically nobody likes to read a victim. Okay. And no one likes to read about anger or even hurt for that long. And so that it's always better to write from the position of the person who is learning. And that I am, you know, if there's a villain, it's me. If there's a bad guy, it's me. If there's someone who falls down, it's me. And I think, so, I mean, it has to be true, obviously. But that helped me a lot, because I do have a couple of tough stories in that. But I had to, even as I wrote them, I had to think, what am I learning here? Like, what have I learned? What is the gift in this for me? What was the gift in that for me? That helped me grow, and that I can see that more clearly now. So I think that's important.
Talk to us about the process of finding an agent, and then the journey from, you know, having your agent to finding a publisher.
Yeah, sure. This particular program that I was in at the University of King's College at Dalhousie University is extremely practical. And as part of that practical training element, they have you practice your book pitch over and over and over again. And so they're wanting you to always be condensing and be able to articulate what your book is about. And to help you do that, they plunk you down in front of agents and publishers who believe in the program and come alongside and say, okay, tell me. And you're actually graded on it. So that's actually how I found my agent. So it's probably an unusual way, but it was a wonderful way. So my agent, Hillary, I was, she was assigned to me. I had to pitch her my book. And at one point she said, well, what is this book about? And I remember saying to her, well, it's not about being a minister's wife. And then she was like, well, what's it about then? And I was like, I don't know. So we sort of batted it back and forth. And then she was, I had an article in the Walrus magazine by then, and I left that with her. And she asked me eventually to send a chapter, which I took a few months to do that before I found my nerve and my courage. And I realized I still had that old fear I had at the very beginning of being a writer, that once I do this, I will know it's not going to work out. So it's easier to not do this. But I did it. I sent her a chapter. She called me and asked to see the whole thing, and she really liked it. And so that was like, for me, that was the moment where I started to actually believe, this is maybe this will happen. Maybe this will occur. And she accepted it and took me on as somebody who, would not describe herself as, a church-going person, but she still saw the value of the book and thought that it actually was, she liked it as a reader too. So that was kind of cool. And then we began the process of rewriting the book proposal. I trusted her completely. I did everything she asked me to do, over and over again. It was a lot of work to get it ready to send out. And then I just left it in her hands. She would send me the rejection letters to,
And were there a lot of rejection letters?
There were. I don't have a number, but there were, probably 8 or 9 for sure, at least. And then lots who didn't even bother writing back. So, their number is probably pretty high. But they were like helpful to read because, and some of them were like, yes, she can write, but there's not a market. Or, I shouldn't maybe go on about the rejection letters. But then when we found the publisher, Tyndale House, I felt immediately at home. And when I first spoke with them on the phone, they wanted to talk about the book, but they also wanted to get to know me. And they asked me like, what do I read? And tell me about your life. And I just felt like they were so helpful and so caring. And that's been my experience with them the whole time. I feel like it's just such a good fit. And I'm so grateful to them.
Fantastic. Karen, writers who've never worked with a publishing company before may wonder what that process is like. You've already done so much work to get the manuscript into the kind of shape where an agent might even look at it. And then, I didn't realize all the work that you had to do with your agent, Hillary, just to get it to the place where she was willing to send it out. It would be understandable to imagine that the work is basically over. But there was still more to do, wasn't there?
So much more to do. Yeah, it was so much work. First of all, I just had to write more. I had to bring it up to the word count that they wanted, which was around 70,000 words. So we worked together to come up with some new chapter topics, and friendship was one of them. Death and funerals was another chapter that they had suggested. I think they initially suggested heaven, actually, but what could I say?
I'm going there.
Yeah, that's it. Right. So we shifted that into sort of death and funerals, I think it ended up being. And then anyway, so yes, there was more to write, but then, the editing, and I am an experienced veteran writer, and I don't mind being edited. I know it makes the work better, but it was hard work. There was a lot of editing and back and forth, um, and rewriting. Like, just what the mental place I had to get in was that every time this gets sent back to me, I have an opportunity to make this better. So even if, let's say the friendship chapter got sent back, and that's what we were working on, I went through the whole book every single time. I made myself, because I knew it was getting better every time I went through. And often it was getting rid of stuff. I wasn't adding, I was pulling out. And especially because it's a spiritual memoir, there's stories and scenes, right? And I would be realizing, this one is about me enjoying myself, me enjoying my memory, and it's not serving the reader, it's not serving the purpose. And so I was pulling out and, kind of weeding the garden every single time. So yeah, it was a lot of work.
Hard work.
Yes. I mean, I would have thought I would have known that.
Well, I think it speaks to your experience as an editor, that you persevered through that, and that you took the approach that you did of rereading the entire book every time. Because I think, less experienced writers and or editors may not have, had the same kind of diligence and willingness to work that hard. So good on you.
Yeah. And I will say, like, I dreaded it. Like, it would come and I would probably spend, like, I would have a week, let's say, I would spend 4 or 5 days of that week circling it, wringing my hands, going for walks, trying to ignore it. And then I'd be like, no, I have to do this. And can I say one other little thing about the editing? Because I think there was also moments where I had to be confident in who I was as a writer and say, no, I want that to remain the way I wrote it. And they completely respected that at all times, which was really great. And there was one part, I write about envy in my book, and which is something I have struggled with and lived with. And I talk about, basically, I turned to Brent after seeing the sort of what I perceived to be impoverished home of a retired minister. And I said to him, we are not ending up like that. And at one point, a member of the editing team asked me to reconsider that scene and said, basically, it's off-putting and people won't like you. And I had to, I sat with that for like an hour or two, but it didn't take me long to realize, no, I'm okay. It's off-putting.
Take that risk.
Yeah. And that's kind of the point. It's in a chapter about envy. And so there were not many moments like that, but a few where I was glad that I knew who I was as a writer and as a person. And I think that comes with the wonderful age that we are at.
Karen, before the pandemic had us all social distancing, Tyndale House had put plans in place for a celebratory book launch. Tell us what was supposed to happen.
Well, I think today we would have been flying back from Chicago, Brent and I. We were going to go down and, I was going to speak at their chapel, and they do sort of a book launch event right at the publishers. So, so that got, swept away like so many other things for so many other people, but it was kind of a bummer. I would have enjoyed that. And I would have loved for them to have met Brent.
Yeah.
But I think it will still happen just further down the line.
Okay, wonderful. No disappointment, obviously, surrounding, the changes and just the timing of all of this is one thing, but it's also an issue that you touch on in the book. You talk about disappointment, and disappointment is something that every writer, every human being feels. Yeah. How have you, as a person of faith, made peace with life's disappointments?
That's, again, such a good question. I think actually Brent has really helped me with that. My husband, I used to find this a hard thing that he would say, but he would basically say, we're completely dispensable. And, when bad things happen, it'd be like, well, not why me, why not me? And so that's always been his thinking on, the hard things of life and the disappointments of life. And I, I, I mean, at first, I think when we were first married and I'd hear him talk like that, I would just think, ugh, that's so harsh. Yet it's true, I think. And so as a person of faith, I have realized that I am called to trust no matter what, and to obey no matter what, and to love and try my best to love no matter what. So for me, the journey has been one of trust, even though things don't go my way, or even though, bad things happen, of course. And I talk about that, like literally saying out loud, I trust you,
Mm-hmm.
to God, even when I wasn't actually doing that, but it helped me to say it. It helped me to pray it. And so, yeah. But and the more we live, the longer we live, and the longer we're in the church, even, you do hear such stories of sad disappointments in life, like big. I mean, the word disappointment isn't even adequate for what some people live through, obviously, and yet, they believe, and they stick to it, and they trust God ultimately, because he is there in the darkness, and he's there in the disappointment. And that's certainly what I discovered, and it's the story I hear repeated over and over again.
I love that, Karen, and I want to thank you for sharing about those moments when you have spoken that out loud. I trust you, because I think, and you unpack, in fact, what your prayer life often looks like. Just mentioning the names of your children one by one, and just in the context of a phrase, and recognizing that is literally holding them before God. And
Yeah.
I think, so many times people, maybe that aren't familiar with the church or whatever, get hung up on prayer and, the language of prayer and things like that. And you make it very accessible. So, that's one of the strengths, I think, in a book that is filled with strengths.
Oh,
So
thank you.
yeah, thank you. Do you sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that was a hard chapter to write, prayer, because it's been such a puzzle for me. But that was one of the reasons I wrote it. Like when I was figuring the book out, I was basically just following my nose, and I think, what am I wondering about now? And prayer has always been a source of wonder and curiosity for me. So that's why I wrote that, even though it was hard to figure out.
Karen, do you have a favorite passage of the book that you could read?
Yeah, I was thinking, because that is the one thing I did know that you might ask me. So I do have a passage from the chapter called Identity, which is the first chapter. So, and I think it captures a bit of my journey. So there was a funeral early on, Brent's first. It was for a tiny baby, a bloom of a girl who had barely lived. Her mother, a teenager, had selected a coffin covered in white faux fur, not much bigger than a shoebox. The coffin was on a small table at the front of the funeral home chapel. The baby's father, a teenage boy, stood outside behind a tree, and that is where he stayed. When I walked into the chapel beside Brent, who wore his clerical collar for one of the first times, the funeral director bowed his head toward me and inquired as to whether I would play the organ. I said no. I didn't play the organ or any other instrument, but clearly there had been a minister's wife in the past who had. I say it's difficult to lead people in worship in the presence of a dead baby in a teeny coffin that is right beside you on a small table. I thought that this first funeral of Brent's might be one of the most difficult ones he would ever have, so I wanted to help him by being present with a calm assurance. I wanted him to be able to glance down when he needed to and see a loving, nodding face, encouraging and reassuring him. I would be strong for him. I sobbed through the entire funeral. I burst into tears with the first strains of the slow, sad country ballad about a dream being just like a river, and from there I could not stop, not even for a minute. Brent avoided looking at me. When I thought it couldn't get any worse, we went to a small reception at the home of the teenage mom and her parents and brothers and sisters. And I was terrified of the stupid things I might say. What if I accidentally asked about the boy behind the tree? But I went anyway. I had to. Brent had to. It wasn't about us. It was about showing up and walking straight in the door, even though I was full of fear. I took my lead from Brent and said, safe things only. I'm so sorry. And yes, please, I will have more tea. This is a beautiful cup. As I started to write the book and write these chapters, memories came back, and that was one of them. I had forgotten about that first funeral he did and my great ambition to be like this solid rock, and how I literally was, I mean, uncontrollably weeping through the funeral because it was so, so sad. And I was of no help to him at all. And then going to visit the family. The thing with spiritual memoir, like for writers, is that the memory brings the meaning. And it's the meaning you're writing about, of course. And so, yeah, that was my hope with that scene. But it was also, as writers, because we're speaking to writers, it was a challenge to capture that, and then remembering that her boyfriend or the father of the baby had stood outside hiding behind the tree. When that resurfaced for me, that memory, I was like, oh, that really happened. But there's meaning there too that's so, tragic and ordinary and extraordinary. And I think those are the things we write about. Anyway, sorry, he didn't ask me to unpack it.
I'm glad you did. You unpack anything you want in conversation with me anytime. And it's my, privilege to get to have conversations with you frequently. So thanks again for agreeing to do this, Karen. It has been a joy. And I believe that this book is going to touch a lot of lives in good and important ways.
Thank you, Patricia.
And it's already touched mine in good and important ways. So thank you for writing.
Well, in our work together, we talk about how important it is to have companions on the way and good writer friends. And that's what you are to me. So thank you.
Thank you. Our next craft, cost, and call conversation will be back to our regular format with both Karen and I asking the questions. So until next time, thanks for joining us.